And now we're here again, recording all over the laptop.
In color.
My first ever podcast. Okay.
And that's our intro.
That is more than any guest has ever done for us.
On this episode of Book Reports Podcast.
C.S. Lewis, Fists of Fury.
Akeem disagrees with Fred Rogers.
Book Reports Podcast is sponsored by the NRA.
Submarines, the plains of the ocean.
The whitest name ever.
And much, much more.
Welcome to Book Reports Podcast, a monthly podcast of high-lyric discussion and lowbrow humor. The only podcast which has been banned from the shelves of your local public library. I'm Sam Tyler.
I'm Bryce Diener.
And tonight we are very happy to once in a lifetime, have a guest on the show. It's been a few episodes since we had somebody to laugh at our jokes so willingly. My goodness. You are the cheap date of comedy. It's
the drugs are working.
Take me to the dollar store and I'll be set.
We are decidedly delighted to have Akeem Clark with us here.
Ooh, yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. Now, Akeem, we do have a question we ask every guest. What kind of books do you enjoy reading typically?
Oh, man. I don't want to call them urban novels, but I kind of want to call them urban novels. See, I grew up in the hood in Philly, right? So the books that I read, I definitely should not have been reading at that age. Nah, man, they're grabbing, like they're so grabbing, and you get into them, and next thing you know, you're involved in 4 drive-bys, and a blog is taking over. So it's
like crime fiction, or
yeah, we can go with that.
And it's usually set in a city.
Yeah, so
examples. Yeah, examples.
All right, I'm gonna give out a title. Kids at home, don't look up this title. What's it called?
But adults, please.
Yeah,
do.
adults,
please do. No,
this is a 2-thumb-up recommend from Akeem if you're over 18.
It's called True to the Game. That's one. That was my reading before I came to the Lord. That was my reading before I came to Jesus. Nah, man. I've read a lot of that. Anything on Titanic, I read. You Know What You Did, Rose. We won't mention any names.
You just did.
I told myself I wasn't going to be petty.
You named a flower. I haven't seen the movie.
I named a flower.
Oh, that's true.
Exactly. I'm Kate Winslet. Excuse me.
Any particular reason you want to read about Titanic?
The musical, man. I was in the musical. It was the best time ever. I never thought I'd be a musical guy, but I got talked into it, and it was the best, 4 or 5 months of my whole life. I cried. It was a disaster. I cried and I died.
Well, that's because he forgot his lines, and he's just on stage crying.
I remember my lines. Get money. Is
that what your line was?
Yeah, that was
the ship is sinking.
Get money.
I really don't know a lot about the Titanic.
First of all, I got the movie at home, and no joke, I've seen the movie probably, it has to be at least 50 times by now. Don't judge me, so what?
No, not judging, amazement.
Oh, bro.
2 different things.
It's new every time I watch it. I see something different. It's weird. I don't know what's wrong with me, but yeah, Titanic, man, I figured I'd start reading up from the movie that I watched 40 million times, and then I was in a musical. Played a character by the name of Charles Clark. He's a second-class broke dude who...
Wait a sec. And your last name is Akeem
Clark.
Clark?
My last name's Clark. My character's last name is Clark, so all I had to do was remember my first name.
Don't you shovel coal into a steam engine for a living?
First of all, I was not that broke. I was not that broke. I was second class.
He didn't have to work his way across the ocean, okay?
Oh, I'm sorry.
My fiance, her name is Caroline Neville. Her real name is Jetta Harrison. Shout out. She was the best. Way out of my league. Somehow, boom, we were together. Thank you. I called her wifey throughout the whole thing because it just makes sense to be in character full time. Why not?
No, I'm in character. It's okay.
They got married in real life just to keep character.
Exactly.
He's a regular Daniel Day-Lewis.
That's dedication.
We wanted to get married.
And then he died.
You know how hard it is and painful it is to die in, 4 shows I think we did? 4 or 5 shows? It was a disaster.
I think that's a great word for the Titanic. A disaster.
You are a mess.
It sunk every time.
Nice things. It did sunk every time.
Boy.
Nah, man, I feel like I'm talking a lot.
You are. It's good.
Great.
It's a good thing.
They tell
We
me
asked you to.
This is an audio format.
We
You're doing
brought
great.
this upon. We brought this upon
I
ourselves.
don't have to do
You two
anything.
have known me for 11 years now, so you should have
Listen,
known what's
when
happening.
we had Marcel Marseille on this, he did nothing, okay? And so you couldn't even tell he was our guest.
Oh,
Did I say that wrong?
Would you like to do that again, but get it correct this time?
What?
Marseille is a city in France, so you're off by one syllable.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Marcel from Marseille. He's a different guy.
Yeah, you don't know him.
You just
He's also coincidentally very quiet. Yeah. He likes to pretend he's Marcel by not talking. That's the only mime he does.
Do you know who was the curtain man for Marcel Marceau?
So,
Wow.
When he was a kid?
oh shoot,
He's one of your favorite actors.
I want to say Wallace Shawn, just because I hope it's him. I don't remember.
I don't know who that is.
Wallace Shawn?
John Lithgow.
John Lithgow. Well, Marcel, good show tonight. Yeah, John Lithgow.
You're both fired.
Wallace Shawn is
This is what we've come to.
the short bald guy in Princess Bride who's really smart and tricks him into drinking the Akeem Clark.
I will have to watch that again because I don't remember that.
Inconceivable.
Come on.
Okay, then. This escalated
that's-
real quick.
No. That's what he shouts.
Okay. All right.
Bryce, you don't have to shout at me, okay? I didn't see the
I'm a guest.
I'm like, guest in all this. I almost called my mama right then and there. Mama, they told me I was inconceivable. Boy, you always gonna be my baby. That's not the point. You miss what I say. Yo, black moms always hit you with that. Mom, they come up, you always gonna be my baby. Oh my goodness.
Welcome to Book Reports Podcast. Hey there, neighbors. The book that I've chosen for this episode is I'm Proud of You, My Friendship with Fred Rogers by Tim Madigan. Listeners, go over to our Facebook page. You're going to find a very lovely photo of me dressed as Mr. Rogers. You're welcome. Tim Madigan is a reporter in Texas, and he was tasked with contacting very famous children's performers on the television. And so he was tasked with contacting Captain Kangaroo and Mr. Rogers. He mentions in the first chapter, he's like, growing up, I was more of a Captain Kangaroo fan, and so I was more excited to talk to him, so I called him first. We spoke for about 10 minutes, and, I was able to do my interview, and then I called Fred Rogers, and we spoke for an hour. And that began his friendship with Fred Rogers. Throughout this entire book, we get correspondence through letters that they shared back and forth, emails, and just packages that they would send each other, like little notes, and just to encourage each other. And they developed this incredibly intense and very intimate friendship over years and years until Fred Rogers died.
When did he do this? You said it was the...
I believe it started when, let me find, it probably has it in the, I should have read the book.
Not again, Bryce. Not again.
In 1995, actually.
1995,
Yes.
okay. Did he only contact those two people, or wasn't Sherry Lewis available?
Or the Brady Bunch.
This is about the right time for Blue's Clues. Steve might have been one of them. Just makes me wonder what other one. The people from Gullah Gullah Island, did they get a call? Just makes me wonder.
Well, I think the idea was that he wanted to talk to them about the current violence that they saw in children's programming.
Oh, that's interesting.
So things like
Teenage Mutant Ninja
Transformers
Turtles,
and
Batman
things like
Age
that.
series, yeah.
Absolutely. Both Captain Kangaroo and Fred Rogers were about the same age, and so they were very early creating television for children, as well as creating more positive programs for children. Captain Kangaroo, I wasn't a part of that generation, but I don't think he really had any violent... I think the most violent thing was there was a moose in there that would throw ping...
Yeah, I was going to say, the most violent thing is ping pong balls, certainly. Yeah,
and so that's about as violent
which is the greatest thing on Captain Kangaroo, by the way. That is so great. The moose puppet would... I believe it's Mr. Moose?
Mr. Moose or something like that.
He would trick Captain Kangaroo into saying the word ping pong ball. And when he would say it, like hundreds of ping pong balls would just fall on him.
That sounds like the best thing ever.
Wonderful.
What year was this?
My dad watched it as probably...
The 1840s.
Pretty much.
Yeah, 1840s. Children's television in the 1840s was much different from nowadays.
Children.
A lot more violence, a lot more racism. There was late 50s, 60s, something like that, and it went on to like the 80s, I think, something like
Still
that.
different.
Through this series of letters with Fred Rogers, they developed this very close personal relationship. And Tim opens up about these issues that he's had with his father. He never felt loved by his father. He had what Mr. Rogers called the Furies, which is just these angry moments that would just come out and express themselves because he didn't know how to properly express his feelings. And so they would well up. I've heard it said that all anger comes from a place of sadness. And so there's something that happened in your past, or Akeem disagrees.
No, I was
With Fred Rogers.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't disagreeing.
Again.
It was one of those things where I was like,
Well,
yes.
well, I was ready to defend that statement.
Okay.
So meet me in the parking lot.
I will.
Won't you be my neighbor?
Will you be my neighbor?
Let's go say hi to our friend Mr. Fist. Yeah.
I think.
Oh, look who's coming. It's Mr. Curbstone.
And Mr. Shank. Let's see what he has to say.
Oh, don't let Akeem get to his car because he has Mr. Bullets. It's called Smith & Wesson and his 15 friends.
Oh, we're going to the land of make-believe.
For a very long
Just
time.
kidding, neighbor. Yeah.
Look at Words podcast, sponsored by the NRA.
You know what goes great with books, kids? Guns.
Go grab one.
Oh, you can put a gun right on top of your favorite book. It'll be a nice page holder right there.
So, saying that all anger comes from a place of sadness, I think anger is more of a secondary feeling in a way that people express their sadness, more of a defensive stance of trying to not show their vulnerableness, that what you've just told me hurt my feelings. And instead of telling you that, I'm going to express it by shouting at you, by raising my voice. Each case, you need to step back and think, why is this person angry at me? What part of their past has caused them to be hurt or feel like they've been mistreated that they can act this way now?
Personally, for me, as a child, I was terrified by fireworks and they would make me cry. Now, as an adult, I'm still terrified of fireworks and they make me very angry. I prefer the angry to being crying, personally, so I don't mind it too badly.
So you can actually trace back your anger to something of sadness.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Quick disclaimer for more of our younger people, because I've actually spoken to some of my younger friends who have never seen Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
What?
And so Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was a show on PBS. It was created by WQED in Pittsburgh. Way back in the 1960s, he was actually able to create this children's program about being positive and having positive things. But they also talked about very tough things like divorce and death and war. Their very first week, they covered the Vietnam War.
Really?
They did.
Wow.
It's like, wow, this is where the show's going.
Wow. I didn't know about that at all.
Yeah,
That's
so
amazing.
King Friday the 13th, which he named Friday the 13th because he wanted to take the power away from Friday the 13th.
Oh.
And every Friday the 13th
Just another thing to reassure kids.
is the king's birthday.
That's neat.
He was worried about change in the land of make-believe, and so he put up these barbed wire fences. And so what they said is like, we should send the king positive messages. And so they wrote like things like love or peace on balloons, and like they'd float it over to the wall, and he'd read these as like, oh, people want positive change. It's like, let's get rid of all the barbed wire, let's get rid of it. And that's my King Friday voice.
And my lady Elaine's coming. Hi.
So through their correspondence, Tim gets down to the root of it and realizes this anger that he's feeling that are coming more from his distant relationship with his father. And so as he would go visit his family, he would go on drives with his father, ask him more intimate questions like, show me where you grew up, like the homes where you grew up.
Built that relationship.
He's like, how many times did your parents show up to your basketball games or soccer game? And he'd said twice. Like immediately. Like
he had the number.
That information. His father's pain was coming from Tim's grandfather.
Right.
Never showing up to the games because his father said twice. My mom showed up twice.
Oh.
As distant of a relationship that Tim had with his father, he never missed a hockey game. He never missed a football game of his. And even though he might have been critical of his son's plays in the game or something like that, he was always willing to support him in that sense. And so as he's working through these emotions, he's actually becoming more open. And as I went through this book, I really got like teary-eyed in almost every single chapter. I'm like fighting back these emotions because as soon as Mr. Rogers would reply, it's something like punched right to the heart of it. He said everything perfectly in such a positive and loving way. My father was very supportive of me, and so was my mother and my family. And so it's not like, oh, Tim is me, instead of, oh, woe is me, oh, Tim is me.
I'm going to cut everything out before Tim is me. I'm just going to let that be there and really make people wonder. Yeah.
My whole segment, Tim is me.
Tim is me.
All right, thanks for coming, Bryce. Akeem, what was your book?
Tim is me. Next.
what you're saying about Fred Rogers' responses bringing tears to your eyes.
Sure.
Can you give us an example of one of those?
I'm glad you asked. As Tim is discovering where these furies and angries are coming from, and he's working through his emotions because it's actually having a strain on his relationship with his wife and his children. He wrote Fred Rogers, I realized that my father was never proud of me. I looked for positive older men in my life who could have been proud of me. Will you be proud of me at the end of my life, looking at my work and what I've done with my life? And Mr. Rogers replies, Dear Tim, the answer to your question is yes, a resounding yes. I will be proud of you. I am proud of you. I have been proud of you since the first we met. I'm deeply touched that you would offer so much of yourself to me. I look forward to knowing that you would care to share in the future. Nothing you could tell me could change my answer yes for you. Please remember that. For the rest of their correspondence, he ends every letter with IPOY, I'm proud of you.
Oh,
love Fred.
That's so adorable.
What I think is incredible is like Fred got to the heart of it, the heart of that issue for Tim. It's like, he was worried about whether Fred would be proud of him. And he looked to Fred for that reassurance. And so Fred always wanted to reiterate, it's like, hey, I'm still proud of you. Even all these years later, I'm still proud of you for who you are, for who you've become, for your willingness just to share your feelings. And
you are tearing up just now. I can see it.
Yeah, it's a very emotional book.
Anything about this book you didn't like?
I went into it expecting it to be like a lot of Mr. Rogers, because that's why I bought the book. I was like, I want to learn a lot about Mr. Rogers, because it's
his shoes are on the cover.
Yeah, he's a lot of the book is Tim sharing his personal life. Like, there's a whole chapter at least where he talks about like his brother getting cancer, and it's like that point is like, I wasn't fully invested in Tim. Let's just get back to Fred Rogers. But you actually do end up getting emotionally attached to Tim's side of the story.
Okay.
Towards the beginning, I think it was maybe more Tim heavy than I wanted, but you do get emotionally invested in it. Just like I think it's such a raw and, like I said, very intimate book that they're so willing and open to share these feelings, and you invest part of yourself into it.
Okay. All right.
I didn't like that it made me cry. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was a big part of my childhood.
Was it? See, I didn't hear that before, that it was a big part. See, I've only seen it a few times as a kid. I've seen more of it as an adult than as a child. What was your experience growing up with Fred Rogers?
I mean, it was something that was on TV, and my parents knew that it was positive. And if you watch the episodes, like, everything about it should have failed. It was a cheap set.
Yes.
There's, like, puppets, and it's repetitive with a not famous individual, and yet somehow all of that lined up to succeed, being an incredible icon of American television.
And that's kind of, I think, the amazing thing about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is it is an awful show. The pacing is terrible. It is very slow. Like you said, it is repetitive.
Yes.
The production values are awful. The host doesn't have much personality at all. But it's all done with so much love, it's impossible for it to be a good show.
And in a television age where everything is getting faster, like you look at Speed Racer, all these like bright flashes and everything like that. You look at Ninja Turtles at the same time. All these shows are coming up. They're very flashy, they're very fast, and they're very loud. Mr. Rogers was very slow. Very quiet. He had an episode that he's like, hey, let's see what it looks like for a turtle to walk. And so very quiet, like just silence. And there's a turtle just slowly walking across the carpet.
And it's wonderful. That's the thing. Like, Mr. Rogers is just wonderful. Yeah. Nothing on that show should be entertaining or welcoming or interesting. But it's so good and so perfectly done. Akeem is looking at me like he's either going to punch me or respond nicely. I'm not sure which.
Mr. Rogers was where it was at.
It was where it's at.
I love it. Go ahead. Yeah, let's hear it.
Like, I would get off of school, book it straight home just to watch Mr. Rogers. And why it was like all of those things, and even back in the day, in the 90s or whenever it was, when everything was moving so fast, like, I needed that to kind of slow me down a bit and slow life down a little bit. I mean, yeah, it was slow, and should it have worked? No. It should not. And it's weird that it worked for me in a situation that I was in, especially being in like South Philly, that should not have worked for an urban community or an urban child or anything of that nature. Like,
well, this is what I wanted to ask you. I wanted to bring up this question.
Talk to me.
Growing up around like a dangerous neighborhood, like, nothing like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, where children would just show up and Mr. McFeely would just burst in the door. He's the mailman. It's like, sure, you can just come into my house and spend an hour with me watching this video of how they make yarn or something. That's normal for the mailman.
We didn't have cops coming over and putting their feet in our pool. We didn't have all that. you see Mr. Dag here, he's my black friend. I figured I'd have him come swim in my pool. You see that episode? I was so mad.
Yes.
I was like, so you can't let my man get all the way in the pool? Like, you just gotta let him soak his feet?
Well,
What is this?
He had his feet in it as much as Mr. Rogers.
I know,
and to be
I
fair, did we really want to see Mr. Rogers in a bathing suit?
I didn't want to see
Just
no
saying.
one's bunions.
You do,
That's what I didn't want to see.
you do in later episodes. It's the episode extras, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
On the DVD specials.
The swimsuit special of
Yes.
Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood?
Yo, did y'all see
That's
the
what we
movie?
want.
Yeah, his relationship with the cops in the neighborhood
Yeah.
was very positive. Maybe in your neighborhood, not so much.
Sure
And so,
wasn't.
I wanted to ask you, why was it that you were so drawn to it in the sense that this is not my neighborhood that he is represented? So did you feel maybe left out because this is not the neighborhood that I live in?
No, I didn't feel left out. We can classify Mr. Rogers as an OG. And to me growing up, like an OG was like the old heads in my community that would look out for the younger crew. I mean, I had a
original gangster.
original gangster.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I dig the rap these kids are saying nowadays.
Urban Dictionary done saved y'all lives. Anyways, for me growing up, I mean, my mom, she got pregnant with me and she couldn't take care of me. So luckily, DHS, lovely them, they placed me with my godparents / parents. I call them mom and dad. If anyone else is to come at me like, oh, they don't look like you, I throat punch them. But no, they placed me.
They don't go outside as often as me. Relax.
Known them my whole life now since I was, I lived with them for the first 3 years of my life. They're my parents now.
Yeah.
I went back home when I was 3. Although I had a male figure there, it really wasn't my male figure because it wasn't my biological dad. So
Sure.
Mr. Rogers, to at least me, we were all in little houses and projects. I don't know how we worked that out, but surprise, we did. And I would come home and watch Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
And for me, that was my OG. That was my outlet. That was my older person looking out for me to make sure I was set. It sounds really silly, I know, but it works for me.
Well, no,
And that's all
I
it is.
think
Akeem, you can punch me now. It's fine.
It's all good. No, it's all good.
Well, I think you maybe had the same connection that Tim did. Is that
did.
he was that positive male figure
Exactly.
that was missing in his life.
Exactly.
Well, I would also wonder, to a certain degree, nobody's neighborhood is Mr. Rogers. Certainly, there are certainly shades of it, of how close you can get to it. That is a world, particularly in the 60s, when that show was first starting up. Well, I take that back. The 70s were fairly rough, too, as were the 80s and 90s. But
And the 2000s and the
2000s and 2010s, yeah. That show wasn't reflecting what the world was, but rather what the world could be. And I think that's really what the big part is. For me, I'm watching it more as an adult because it's just fun to watch Mr. Rogers. It's almost the same way that I enjoy Bob Ross.
Here's my thing. I don't know if I could get through. No, let me change this. I know I won't get through the movie without crying. Like, even now as an adult. If they had reruns of the show, I couldn't do it. Did y'all go see the movie?
I did. I cried.
That was my worry. That's why I didn't go. And I was just like, I'm going to have to wait until this comes out on DVD so I can do my crying at home in my own basement like a real thing.
I think they said next year it'll be on PBS.
I saw the trailer for it, and I just started tearing up just from a trailer for a documentary. It's called
Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Which, funny story, I went to go see the movie, and I totally forgot what the movie was, and I went to the tickets, and I said, I want to see that Mr. Rogers thing, and they're like, yeah, okay, here you go, here's your ticket.
Mr. Rogers thing, how dare you?
Like the documentary, I forgot what the thing was called. And so...
Could you be more specific, sir? We have 3 of those.
And so I went up to the guy that wrote my ticket, and he says, Won't You Be My Neighbor, which is the name of the film, and I'm like, sure.
I should punch you in the face.
And then he finished and said, we'll be in theater 6.
My guess is he already saw it and was so full of Fred Rogers' wholesomeness that he wasn't able to be angry.
Yeah, he
at
didn't want to
anybody.
hurt me.
Nah, I'd
my
be
guess.
heated. You come up to me talking about some. Sure. After I ask you a question like that, we fighting.
The movie made me tear up and like, oh, don't do this to me. And so I like tried to hold it back, but then you just like hear like, like for me, it's like, oh, they know I'm crying. They know I'm crying. And then they'd be crying.
When did you cry? Spoiler free. What made you cry?
In the first 3 minutes, there's a
That
scene.
did not take long at all.
There's a very young Fred Rogers, and he's like comes out in front of his children. It's like a meet and greet almost. For whatever reason, the kids just kind of like ran the show, and they just like come up one at a time. And at one point, there was just like this little girl that came and was like, Mr. Rogers, I just want to tell you, I like you.
I remember that one. Bruh, I remember it, and I sat back, and I was like, I'm not gonna make it.
Yeah, so she's like,
Your story sounds like you're invading Normandy. Like, I'm not going to make it. I just know it. I'm not going to make it off the beach.
calling my mama. No, I was like, I like you, Mr. Rogers. And it's like, well, I like you too. I was like, oh no, this is the It's a very emotional movie because it definitely hits like the points that it needs to, and with a very emotional, loving, caring man. I was thinking about this as I was reading the book, and it reminded me back in our 4th episode with Jared. I had mentioned I was going over the book Monuments Men.
Oh, right.
And I had mentioned we have this issue that we almost glorify in a bad way Adolf Hitler, making him seem more than human. Bad things that bad will never happen again because people that bad will never exist again. And so on the flip side of that, I want to encourage people that Fred Rogers was a human being, just like you and I were. Just because he died does not mean that we can't have people just like Fred Rogers out there, that we can't encourage one another. His deepest thing was loving each other. And on that note, get ready to cry. Because, I want to tell you guys, just like Mr. Rogers told Tim, that I'm proud of you as well. Sam, coming up through life without a father for, I'd say, half of your life. Having to be the man of your family and having to step into that role. I think you've done that quite well. And I'm very proud of you.
Thank you, Bryce.
And Akeem, having to come up through I was going to say slums, but it's not slums. The projects of Philadelphia. The batter part. The part without the bell. You sharing your life, especially on this episode, it's incredible to hear what you've come through and to see the man that's before us today, that you've come out pretty well whole out of it, that you're an incredible human being. The fact that you are, you probably know individuals who have prison sentences, who are in prison or have died from gang violence or something like that. It's like, that's not something that you went into. So it's incredible that you had those positive aspects in your life and that you should be proud of yourself for coming out of that. And I'm proud of you as well.
Bryce, I just want to say I appreciate you telling me all these things, and it wasn't easy. And Bryce, from the bottom of my heart, I just want to tell you, you're doing all right.
So now that I've done crying, Akeem, I understand that you brought a book to share.
I did. Well, I forgot to grab it off my nightstand this morning because the way it sits is my alarm clock's here.
Then the nunchucks.
Alarm clock.
Throwing stars.
Alarm clock's there. And then the iPad.
Bazooka.
And then Smith & Wesson and his 15 friends. Correction, 14. 15 if you do it right. 15 if you do it right.
One in the chamber.
One in the chamber.
Yeah.
My Bible's there. And then there's a stack of books.
Very nice.
But no, this book is called Flight number 116 is Down. It is fiction. Caroline B. Cooney. Boom. I know nothing about her. I just know a lot about the book because it made me giggle. It is actually that came out wrong. It didn't make me giggle. It made me kind of sad.
I was going to say it.
It's actually for
ages. Airplanes down. Ha ha.
It's for ages 12 and up. Luckily, I was a teenager when I read it. And then I read it again like a good year ago out of just why not? Because I wanted to reminisce.
Nice. Yeah.
Times were. So I read it twice.
It's usually a reread when you get to really see how good a book actually is.
I read it like 3 times.
Nice.
The main plot line of this is it's a cold, icy night. The main character, her name is Heidi Lanseth. Such a white name.
She's Puerto Rican. Look at you judging, audience. It's her quinceañera.
I'm sorry. Her name is Heidi. Her and her parents are they're on some like business trip because they're super bougie and they live out in the middle of nowhere. And a plane, the flight number is 116 again. It crashes pretty much right in her backyard. So, she's trying to combat all the fear of being a teenager and also trying to be like, oh, I want to go help. It kind of freaks out. The other main character is a gentleman by the name of Patrick. He's a trainee EMT, go figure. And he's so impatient because he's waiting for, horrible as it sounds, I think, honestly, all emergency personnel think like this. They're waiting for that next big thing to happen. So,
gotcha.
Although, we obviously don't want people to get hurt, we're also kind of sitting there like, when is something going to happen?
Well, you're on the clock. Yeah.
Well, yeah. He was sitting, I believe, at a diner or somewhere. Next thing you know, his scanner goes off. Hey, it's a plane crash. He books it towards Heidi's house, and Heidi's just sitting there trying to pretty much combat the fear of what just happened, what do I do? And, she realizes that for a while, she's the only person there. So, she has to take one for the team and try to be a hero.
So, makes me wonder then, is that the plot of the book? Is her helping out, or is that just the beginning of it?
Both.
So, what percentage of the book is her helping people in the plane and doing the hero stuff?
A percentage of...
I'm just wondering, is it a story...
You going a real number?
Be as accurate to
31.4%.
Be accurate to 3 places, please.
Probably half of it's her, and then the other half is pretty much everyone else just running around like they're crazy. So EMTs, firefighters, flight medics, they're coming in.
So it's very much a story of her gaining her hero.
It's just that. It's her gaining that, were you going to say heroism?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just like verbatim. I just can't talk today. And it's her gaining that.
We have evidence that points otherwise, Akeem. You were just fine.
But yeah, it's her gaining that confidence and that heroism to believe in herself, for one, because she's a teenager. I mean, what teenager is a little bit, I don't want to say I lack confidence, but a brother lacks some confidence. So, she's trying to gain that. And Patrick, he is basically like, okay, now I have to prove myself. All this is extremely overwhelming, but my training is going to kick in and I got this.
So it's a rich story of people being thrown into an experience where they could shine or could completely fail and kill
they
people.
They can either do really great or they can bomb. And if they bomb, everyone else is kind of bombing along with them, or they already did.
Oh, okay. So. Are there other books like this that you enjoy? Like, is there a set genre of disaster that you enjoy?
I mean, it's weird that the two books that I enjoy involve the two things that freak me out, the ocean and heights.
I bet you would love books about submarines because they're like planes, but for the ocean.
Submarines! The planes of the ocean!
Submarines freak me out, bro. But I would probably enjoy it. I probably would enjoy it.
In case of emergency, please note the nearest exit.
Yeah.
The torpedo tube!
Please, don't forget to depressurize. Oh, crap, I forgot that part. Dude's whole thing implodes.
Please turn off your cell phones before we submerge.
Is this one of the stories that made you interested in being like a first responder? Because you're not like...
that's true. How old were you when you read this first time?
I was a teenager when I read this.
Okay.
But you're not like an EMT or something like...
Not yet. Fun fact, I completed an EMT course. I did all that. I passed the class. I passed my practical. But I was so far out of training at that time, I couldn't get past my written part. So here it is, folks. Do not procrastinate. Don't do it. Once you got something and you know you're going to pretty much finish it, if I would have stuck through with everything and did everything on time without procrastinating, I would have been fine. I would have been certified 2.5 years ago. But
this book maybe pushed you in that direction or maybe got you more interested?
I think it had a hand in it. Like, I hate average 9-to-5s. Like, I have to be running and going into some stupid, crazy event trying to help other people. That's me. I don't know where that came from. It might have been this freaking book. But,
I'm glad we could harness that.
I'm glad you can harness that.
Thanks a lot, Cooney.
Thanks a lot, Caroline.
Well, let me ask you this then. What part of this book do you enjoy? Is it the character? Is it seeing the characters grow? Is it that background of disaster? What part of it sings to you?
It's really everything, honestly. It's the character development. Number one, the fact that Heidi gained her confidence in it. When she, actually put one foot ahead of the other and started, I was just like, yo, you go, girl. I was back there like, diva. I was a thug okay, well, maybe that wasn't so thug life. But anyways.
Heidi, thug life.
This is the best quinceañera ever.
I was really rooting for her. I was like, yo, you go, girl. I was like, girl. But no, I do think this had a big hand in it. Every time I see an ambulance flying by, I'm just like, man, I got to get up in that. So it's... That sounded so awkward.
Yeah.
That
flash it,
so
baby.
They got it going on.
You hit those LED lights.
Check out the automatic external defibrillator on that. Gets my heart a going every time.
That's the intro.
Only digits you need on 911.
Call me.
Oh my goodness.
I'm leaving in as much of that as I possibly can. Not all of it, but most of it.
Sorry, Akeem, we had to cut your book.
It's okay. I'll come back and do it another time, guys.
How did you find this book? Do you know?
My high school teacher, his name is Mr. McGargle. This is my junior year. So I just moved up here, and probably because I was never like that kid in Philly. I was always... How did my teacher say it once? She said articulate. It was my middle school.
That's a really nice thing for a teacher to say.
It was my middle school teacher. No, I promise. I might have hung out with the wrong kids a lot, but I was never the person to just...
Was it the chess club?
Really, yes. We had one of those. I sucked at chess, but we did it. We had a Warcraft club, too. Back in my...
That's great.
It was the best thing ever. Was it Harrington? I think it was Harrington Elementary School
that's
in Philly.
neat, man.
We stayed after school and played Warcraft. Where was I going with this? What just happened?
Mr. McGargle.
Yes, sorry, Bluford. Wow. Had nothing to do with Bluford. Bluford series. It's the Bluford series. Look
I thought that was his first name.
I was hoping it was Bluford McGargle.
Mr. Bluford McGargle. Mr. Bluford McGargle.
Mr.
I think his name
Bluford
is Kevin.
McGargle.
I think his first name is Kevin McGargle. I can't remember. He's my homie. Anyways, so, he had this bookshelf, and for some reason, I just went for whatever books I thought would get my attention. And it was this one, which I think he actually let me keep this book. I think that's how I had
that's
it.
cool.
He either let me keep it or I bought it from Amazon.
Oh,
no. I definitely would have gave it back.
You never gave it back. I've got a few of those.
He McGargled him right under the table.
You got McGargled.
And then it was like high school fiction books, but it was based on high school student. It was a Bluford series books. And I do thank Mr. McGargle because I was a disaster in, like, when I first moved here and I was fresh out of Philly. So, yes, I was never one of those kids, but I still came up from that background to where I dealt with a lot of issues. And then it kind of poured out to the people who were really looking out for me and, like, doing good. So, he looked out. I'm pretty sure he gave me that book. Shut up, you two.
No, that's great, though. Like, that is fantastic that there was a person who could step in and a person who is willing to give you a book that you read that they know you enjoyed. Like, that's awesome. That's exactly what this podcast's about. Yeah. Give me a book, Bryce. No, but
why don't you listen to the Christmas episode?
Yeah, Bryce has given me 2 books on air. I've given him a nice thank you. I keyed the word thanks into his car.
Thanks. Goodness. Slap the hole in all 4 tires. Go ahead, Carrie.
That's how we do it in the Grove. Just so you know.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's a Pottsgrove joke, ladies and gentlemen. Do you know where Pottsgrove is? Me neither.
And now they know where you live.
It's probably because you blinked as you drove by, I'm guessing.
I sneezed once and I was like, where's Pottsgrove?
I took a step once and I was passing.
Easy.
What just happened? No, not like that, you dork. I just walked by it.
Yeah, that's okay. One step and you're done. Easy.
Oh, I thought
I'm
you said
agreeing
like,
with you.
Calm down, Akeem.
Sorry.
Whoa.
My bad, D. My bad.
Well, my book this month is Seventh Son by Orson Scott Card. Very interesting book. It is colonial fantasy. Which is an interesting genre I haven't pledged my feet into yet.
That's a genre?
Well, I think it's far more interesting to have something that isn't generic fantasy with elves and dwarves and just regular stuff. Like Tolkien did it great. Nobody else has. I think fantasy.
That's C.S. Lewis.
That's not the same kind of fantasy, and you know it. Come on now. Nary an elf. Nary an elf. A lot of people haven't really advanced the ideas of generic fantasy, so I love it when I find a fantasy book that is its own separate genre, its own special time period. Like, instead of being medieval Europe, this is colonial America as a fantasy setting, which is the main reason I got excited about this book. And I've been looking for more books by Orson Scott Card. I think he's an interesting author. I think he has a very interesting perspective being a fundamentalist Mormon. I think that's a very interesting perspective to have as an author. Seventh Son, as a fantasy setting, takes all the superstitions and folklore of colonial America and makes them fact. It's also an alternate history setting, so in this one, in the English Civil War, the Restoration never happens, so Oliver Cromwell remains Lord Protector of England, the king never takes the throne back again. So you have the New England colonies, I think it's the Royals? There's a really nice map that shows what a colonial America looks like in this time period.
Love a good map.
I do love a good map. Oh, the Crown colonies, which is basically all that's left of Great Britain with following the monarchy. You have the actual United States that rebelled. You have all the other territories that are being settled slowly by all the other people. A much more fractured America, which is really, really fun and interesting to look at. But what I enjoyed the most was, because he's taking the folklore and superstitions of the American colonies in the colonial America, almost all of it is rooted in either Native American legendary or Christianity. So he gets to play around with Christianity and some of the folklore around it.
Coming from a Mormon.
Exactly. Interesting.
Man, this source series is good. I wish I had some popcorn. Keep going.
For me, what I kind of enjoyed the most was seeing the bits and stuff I recognize already in the book. Like Seventh Son, if you're the seventh son of a seventh son, you're probably going to be born lucky or have an amazing destiny or be very powerful. That's all in this book. The main character is Alvin Miller Jr., who is the seventh son of a seventh son. He obviously has a destiny because water keeps trying to kill him. When his mom is pregnant with him, she goes into labor while they're crossing a river, and the river just suddenly rushes at him. When he is very, very young, he falls down a well and almost drowns. At one point, he is helping move a millstone, and a little bit of the ground is wet, so it slips and falls on his leg.
He goes to answer the door, and it's a wave.
Yeah, my man just needs to stay away from water. Like, what's he doing?
He has a great destiny, and something doesn't want him to follow it.
By water.
Well, that's the fun thing, though. He is a guardian angel, though. You see, in folklore, there's this thing called a call. And it's in real life, too.
You say cult?
Call, C-A-U-L.
Okay. Whew.
If a child is born and it has a bit of the amniotic membrane over its head still, it has to be removed because the kid can't breathe with it. But that membrane is called a call. And if you hold on to that call, it can give you great, great power. He was born with a call over his head. So whoever has that call is keeping him safe and alive throughout the book. And this was just a really fun, interesting book because of the way that it used that kind of folklore and that kind of superstition to be able to make a full fantasy setting. I really enjoyed that. I thought that was really fun to see and to examine that.
What happens if they get sniped with a flaming arrow?
It didn't happen yet.
Okay.
The thing that's amazing about the main character, Alvin, is that he is what's called a maker. And the maker is somebody who is able to have basically a knack to put things together, to make things. And he is destined to be somebody who is going to make something great or something. This is the first book in a series, and I didn't realize that.
Hold on, are you saying he's going to make America great again?
He is going to make America great again.
Or no, I guess this is when it was great the first time.
Oh, yeah.
And now they're trying to make it great again.
Great again, yeah. There really isn't America, though.
Back on the plane. on personal foul, offense, and defense at the same time.
Well, there really isn't an America in this book, exactly. There's the United States, but that's just a couple of them. Like, it's just like half of Pennsylvania and some of New York.
What year is this set in?
17?
Probably like 1810, something like that.
Lord,
something like that. Benjamin Franklin is a character who is mentioned but doesn't show up. He's basically an atheistic wizard in this book, which I thought was a pretty good way of doing Benjamin Franklin.
Sounds kind of terroristic to me.
George Washington was a general for the king in the royalist colonies, but when he saw how brave the Americans that were rebelling were, he turned over his forces to the Americans to join and then turned himself in to be beheaded by the king.
Oh, that sucks for him.
That was pretty neat to see, the way they use the real-life historical characters. William Blake, the poet, is one of the main characters of this book. He is named as Tail Swapper. Kind of takes Alan Miller under his wing and helps him to be able to grow into a man. It was neat. It was a good book. It does have one major weakness as a book, though, I think. It's really obviously the first book in a series. It doesn't really come to a real full-on story or climax. Like, this book was mostly set up. That's really, I think, a bit of...
Do you find out what his destiny is, then, in this book?
No, he is, I think, 14 by the time this book ends, so...
Do you find out who the person is who has his call?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, we do.
That's what I really wanted to know. I've been itching to ask that question since you said it.
It is a nice person.
Okay, great.
This is the first I've heard of this genre. Are there other authors maybe that delve into colonial fiction?
Well, you mostly tend to get weird westerns, which is like science fiction and horror being merged into the western genre. And I don't think there's too much colonial fantasy. And that's one thing I like, is it's such a weird, different thing.
Sure.
Like, I love it when they have a mixing of genre and fantasy, like the work of Glenn Cook, where it's film noir and fantasy put together. I like the different settings for Dungeons & Dragons, where it's Ravenloft, which is all like horror movies in a fantasy setting. I like it when fantasy takes something specific and does something with it, as opposed to just being generic. If you can tell an interesting story, that's great. And if it's also fantasy, that's great. But that story needs to be interesting first. Otherwise, it's not going to be as good, I think.
Are you interested in reading the follow-up books?
I think I liked this book's setting more than its story, but because it was a setup book only, like this was basically a prequel, basically just an origin story without really being what he's going to be doing, I can kind of accept that. I am certainly looking for the rest of the books in the series to see where it goes. I certainly hope he expands the setting. I think that if you have all of American history to play with, I think that he should be able to get more than enough story out of that, for sure. Let alone having the supernatural stuff laid over it.
Agreed.
I think it'd be fun to read the rest of them. Although, if the next book he still hasn't done anything, I will probably be stopping. That is a little annoying.
You mentioned at the beginning that he was a Mormon.
Is a Mormon, yeah.
Is a Mormon. So he's still alive at this time.
Yeah,
supposedly, if it's still...
Sam has an alibi. Why do you ask?
I'm not suspicious. You're suspicious.
Does that come through in his writing?
I had read another book, which was a collection of short stories, and he talks about this series in it. I wasn't even aware of it at the time, but he says that he was surprised to get letters from people saying they could tell he was a Mormon by this series. Like, he wasn't even trying to put stuff in there. But I think if you are a Mormon and you are writing a story about the supernatural in colonial America with westward expansion, it's gonna have some ties somewhere. Like that's
Sure.
such a major theme in Mormonism is amazing things in America. I can't help but see some sort of connection there. Supposedly, there are things that are much more obviously Mormon-y. That sounds really awful for me to say Mormon-y. I don't like
Sounds
Mormon-y.
pretty interesting. Keep it.
Mormon-y?
Mormish?
Mormish. More Mormish. There are things that are more Mormish later on in the series. From what I read on the internet while just looking up this book after reading it. But I didn't really hit anything too obvious. It does have, I think, a really interesting villain. Actually, two really interesting villains, both of whom are practicing Christians in this book. And they're both villains because of pride. And that I thought was really well written. Like, on the one hand, it was like, come on, do the Christians have to be the villains? At the same time, it's like, yeah, but those are both believable Christians. Like, they're both people that you could identify and say, yeah, that is a sin Christians have for sure, too. Which I thought was interesting. His depiction of a preacher who is here to save everybody from this foolish magic because he knows everything. And the husband who won't let his wife practice magic because he's afraid of it. I thought those were both very interesting, very believable Christian archetypes that we definitely have seen in the church. That those were very well written, I thought, too, particularly. And they were both awful villains. I mean, they were both awful people. At the very end of the book, they both have chances to not become villains. They both have a chance to stop and atone and to decide to follow and do what's right.
And they turn into Al-Qaeda.
They both fail the test. They both move on into villainy, which I thought was very well written.
Good. What didn't you like about it?
Just the fact that it was obviously introducing the series. Like, it is obviously the first book in a series. It doesn't move into its own story. The plot of the book is more just setting up the book series than does anything else. Which, had I known going into it, I wouldn't have minded. But since I wasn't aware of that going in, it was like, well, where's the story? Are you starting the story soon? How about the next chapter? Nope, not yet, huh? 50 pages to go and the story hasn't started. This is the first book in a series, isn't it? Yes, it is. All right.
Well, that's the final chapter. Well, maybe this next chapter will be it.
That's the thing about, like, it does have a climax to it, but it is the beginning of a story, not the end of one at all.
I get it.
Which, if it's a series, that's okay, but if you're going to have a book that is, 250 pages or so? Sorry, 240.
You're close.
I know.
You're
I'm
so
off the
close.
podcast.
I can't believe you were off.
You should be able to have time to have a story in there somewhere, not just, this origin.
That's one of the issues I have with George R. R. Martin's Fire and Ice series, which we get the show Game of Thrones from. I've read all the books that are out. The first one really holds up as its own individual story, but the other stories are just like, let's continue the plot. Let's continue the plot. Let's continue the plot.
Right.
And so, like, for 4 books, the last book better be epic. That's what it's building up to. It's like, these books can't stand alone by themselves.
You can do it well to have a book set up the series. That can happen really well. Like Sorcerer's Stone, for example. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone does a good job of setting up the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. It's also a complete story.
I was about to say it's also its own thing.
It does a great job of introducing that world. Fellowship of the Ring, which is the first third of Lord of the Rings, is setting up the other two, but it also has its own fulfilled narrative. Breaking of the Fellowship at the very end. You should be able to tell a complete story and not just have it be set up. And I
Chronicles of Narnia.
Yes.
It's even titled that I guess I was going to say Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe. It's not titled Chronicles of Narnia. It's Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe stands by itself.
No, when the book was published, it was C.S. Lewis's Paramount production of The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Book 1. Yeah,
Yes.
That was the full title.
C.S. Lewis needs drop kicked.
He will mere Christianity your butt, Akeem. Oh, yeah.
You got a point.
The Problem with Pain? What do you think that book's about?
He's going to teach you the 4 hates.
Well, this took a turn for the worse. Goodness.
The Great Divorce of Your Face and Your Head. Surprised by Joy and C.S. Lewis's Fist of Fury.
So, Sam, you were recently on another podcast betraying us.
That's true. I have been unpodcast unfaithful. That is very true. I've been stepping out with other podcasts. That's very, very true. Okay. I've been producing some segments for the Miskatonic University podcast, which is a Lovecraftian horror podcast that I listen to. I've been getting some very nice comments from people listening to that. It's been pretty neat to take some of the horrible ideas in my head and put them out in the world. That's been really fun for me. And they gave us a shout out most recently on their show. They said that everybody should listen to Book Report's podcast with Sam Tyler and Bryce Diner.
That's right. Thanks, Chad.
Chad, I cannot tell you how much I loved it that you mispronounced his name. I just loved it. I could not wait to tell him.
Remember, kids, it's Diener. It rhymes with wiener.
And it's plagued Bryce's entire life.
Yes. Every 12-year-old boy has ever told me. It rhymes with
sounds
weed.
like weird.
I get it, kid. Thank you.
Yeah, well, my fist sounds like your face!
I'm trying to go to sleep. Get out of my room. How'd you get in my house? I want to thank Akeem Clark for joining us. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, man. It's fun. I know a lot of folks still, it's 2018, and people are still weird about reading. I don't understand it. Like, I love this podcast. I do. I can't wait to hear this one because I'm probably going to laugh a lot more than what I already have. But if I could do anything, honestly, it's just encourage people to read. Just read, boys and girls. Read as much as you can. I don't care if it's night, day, the afternoon. I don't really care. Reading, it's powerful. I'm telling you, it's coming from a dude who is a disaster from the streets. Read the book.
is almost dead right now.
Oh, can they what?
Can our listeners, if they definitely loved listen to you. If they're still listening at this point, they've definitely loved. If they haven't shut off,
if they stop listening during my
if they haven't set their computer on fire in the yard, they've loved every segment that you've been. Is there a way that they can enjoy more? Like, are you on any other shows?
You can look up Here Below Worship on Facebook, YouTube. That's a group out of Christ Wrestling Church. We did start a music group /band / group of friends who just want to get together and sing to Jesus. YouTube.
And what do you play?
I play
the electric triangle.
The electric triangle, yes. I got a solo. I have a solo.
That's the theremin. I was going to say that's the electric triangle. Yeah.
During that, do they actually have an electric triangle? Because now I kind of want one. What do? I sing for them. I play guitar. I play drums. It's a extremely talented group, and I love them all dearly. So look us up. Listen to us. Ask for plays.
Akeem's the white girl, by the way.
Yes.
If you're looking at photos,
I am white girl with the long brown hair. They call me Becky with the good hair. That's what they call me.
Book Reports podcast episodes aren't done until we've had just a little bit of racism.
That's right.
That's just the right amount. That's important.
Yes, kids, but remember, never too much. Racial jokes are never okay.
Never.
If you're still listening,
why? And review us on iTunes.
Yes. You can find us YouTube, SoundCloud for a little bit. We'll probably shut that down soon, folks. So get one last listen in, or just keep listening on YouTube or iTunes like normal folk. So find us elsewhere. Rockosaurus Rex.
Don't go extinct.
You can like us on Facebook.com/BookReportsPodcast. Email us at BookReportsPodcast.com. And if that's not...
At BookReportsPodcast@gmail.com.
There you go.
If you send email to BookReportsPodcast.com, we will not reply.
We will not get...
We will rarely reply to those.
At AOL.com.
I'd like to announce our new Angel Fire website we've started. It's going to be really great. We joined a couple web rings.
We got a letter. It's from your mom.
What?
Yes.
What are you talking about?
Your mom emailed us.
What?
And it's glorious. I just finished listening to the wonderful May podcast, and I want to say, Sam, you are welcome. So thoughtful of you to thank me for refusing to vote. I really enjoyed the podcast. I almost always do. From your mom.
Almost always do?
Yes.
I think it's your segment.
I love the majority of the episode.
Whenever Sam is talking, the majority of the episode.
So, Mrs. Tyler, thanks for writing us in. Mm-hmm. Feel free to write us anytime. And listeners,
hi, Mom.
And listeners, if you would like to be read as much as Mrs. Tyler,
or be as rad as Mrs. Tyler, go try.
Email us. Email us at bookreportspodcast@gmail.com. If you like Sam and what he's doing, hey, he's almost done with Constantinople. Don't worry. It'll be great. SkullduggeryInTheSmoke.blogspot.com. You can find more of his stuff here. Our theme song, Kevin MacLeod, Incompetech.com. Great job, Kevin. I'm Bryce.
And I'm Sam.
And we'll see you next episode.
On a different note, how much do you think the Philadelphia Zoo would charge me to hold a koala bear? I just want to hold a koala bear.
Akeem, I need to break your heart right now, okay?
Okay.
Koalas have tons of venereal diseases.
Like chlamydia.
They have everyone. They have...
What they guys?
They have tons, and the reason that almost all of them have it is because they eat eucalyptus and it's hard for them to digest.
See?
So when they have a baby, the mom digests it for them, and the baby eats the mom's poop, which is how he gets all the diseases.
Oh, no.
So if you want to hold a koala, wear gloves.
Oh, that's all. Okay.
That's all. Yeah.
That's easy.